do a bit of a short introduction to our session this lunchtime for Sandwell Council around helping SMEs go electric. So hopefully today we'll give you a few answers to what you've been looking for. As part of the session today as well, we'll be going through how to switch to an electric vehicle, why to electrify your fleet, looking at charging in the workplace, bit of myth busting, and kind of looking at what funding is available as well. So as we are in a webinar session this afternoon, any questions that you have, please go to the Q&A button down on your screen. If you've got any issues as well, please just put a comment into the comments box. I have my colleague Richard Drew with me, and I'm Heather Foster, and we'll be kind of going through this webinar together. So you will be on microphone for the webinar, but if you've got any questions, please just put them through the Q&A, and this will be recorded as well. And we will provide the slides after the event. So just to give you an introduction to myself and Richard, we are from the Energy Saving Trust. So we are an independent organisation working to address the climate emergency. So we work with individuals, businesses, councils and communities to kind of reduce carbon emissions and energy saving as well. And we are funded through the Department for Transport for this webinar today. So if you have any questions, we are independent and impartial advice. So I will hand over to Oliver Ford and Gareth Owens from Sandwell Council, just to give a bit of an introduction to what Sandwell Council has been doing.
Thanks, Hannah. Yes, just briefly, last year, Sandwell Council adopted the Black Country ULEV strategy, which was a wide strategy across the 4 Black Country authorities. That's Walsall, Dudley, Wolverhampton and Sandwell. And that strategy really outlined what each of the councils needs to do in the region to meet the infrastructure challenge posed by the proposed 2030 ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles. A large part of that work was baselining where we are and what we can expect in terms of an increase in the number of ULEVs over the next 5 to 10 years. And just to give you an idea of the scale of the challenge, it's anticipated that by 2025 there will be an extra 10,000 electric vehicles on the streets of the Black Country. And then it really broke down what actions need to be taken by each of the councils. And this is this action broadly falls under 3 main headings. So the first one is the provision of public charge points, and in particular on-street charge points for those who can't charge on their own driveways. So this is looking at installing public 7 kilowatt chargers on terrace streets. We've got approximately £400,000 worth of funding to deliver 37 charge points over the next financial year, so up to March 2023 within Sandwell. And then secondly, fleet electrification of the council's fleets themselves. So Sandwell Council is currently carrying out a fleet review of its own fleet vehicles and looking at the best way to replace current petrol and diesel vehicles with electric vehicles. And then thirdly, looking at the best ways to support taxi fleet electrification as and when taxis will naturally be transitioning to electric vehicles for their own businesses. So yeah, that's just a brief overview of what Sandwell Council is doing at the moment. Thank you, Heather.
That's great. Thank you so much, Oliver. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what the council's doing, just so when we go through what businesses could do, it gives you an idea that the council are also on their own journey to decarbonising transport as well. So, and there are more links with the council that we will talk about towards the end of this session as well. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of why switch to an electric vehicle, and I'll hand over to my colleague Richard Drew, who'll be going through that part with you.
Thanks, Heather, and good morning, everybody. So yeah, I'm just going to pick up a little bit on the reasons why and some of the background, and then we'll talk a bit more in detail about the vehicles and charging and some other things. So if we can move on, please, Heather, to the next slide. So I'm going to begin by giving you a bit of context to why we're sort of really very much talking about electric vehicles and electrification of fleet at this point. You will no doubt all be aware that UK government confirmed that the sale of petrol and diesel cars and vans will be banned by 2030, and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which we'll talk about in more detail, will then be banned by 2035. But there are a number of, I suppose, key reasons around that. I've just picked out some of the three main ones here. So first, and probably foremost in many people's mind, although no one of these is perhaps any more important than the other, is around the climate emergency. Transport currently represents around about 27% of all carbon emissions, which is the highest proportion of carbon emissions out of all sort of emission factors, including manufacturing, and it's growing in output. That's in part due to a surge in demand for freight and logistics. You know, even pre-COVID, we were all shopping online much more, and certainly for the last couple of years, almost all of our shopping, certainly during lockdowns, was all done online, and lots of home deliveries was happening. Linked to that also is a increased demand for larger SUV type vehicles. We're seeing most manufacturers now providing their larger vehicles an SUV, which have associated higher emissions related to them. Another aspect of the reason why we've got this big move towards EV is concerns and the need to deal with issues around air pollution. So we know that poor air quality contributes to around about 40,000 preventable deaths a year, and there's an increasing public awareness of this. So there's obviously a need to take steps to bring the UK within legal NO2 limits, and in fact, government legislated a number of cities, a number of areas had to at least make plans to put in clean air zones. We've seen the first couple of those now in Birmingham and Bath, and we're seeing Manchester, Bristol, Oxford. Obviously, London's ultra low emission zones was put in place and has been expanded, has been planned to expand again. So there's lots of work being done around that as well. And finally, perhaps most importantly for the audience here today, it's around economic opportunities, particularly in our unstable economic climate. It's really important that the government see it as really important that perhaps trying to make the UK a global player in the EV production and technology market. There's a lot of research and development work being done here, and there's been some significant announcements in the last few months around development of some of the current manufacturing facilities. So there's a large plant linked to the Nissan plant in Sunderland that's had an announcement of around £1 billion investment in the area to produce a new electric vehicle for Nissan. There's also an announcement of a significant gigafactory, so the factories that are producing electric batteries, also in the northeast, that's going to provide around 3,000 jobs by 2028. So there's lots to be done there. Another consideration around that is how developing the electric vehicle market and developing the electric vehicle fleet in the UK can really support the grid at times of high demand. So using technology called vehicle to grid can allow electric vehicles that are not being used to support, top up the grid at times of high demand, and then recharge them at a later date. So that's a bit about the context. Next slide here, I'm just going to talk in a little bit more detail about the vehicles. So throughout this presentation, we'll be talking about electric vehicles, or essentially a vehicle with a plug. Those are essentially a BEV, a battery electric vehicle, or a PHEV, plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So we've got some examples of both. On the left of the screen here, we've got some different examples of cars and vans, but a battery electric car and van. So they are fully electric, so they are solely powered by an electric battery and one or a motor powering one or two or four of the wheels, the road wheels in a vehicle. They have a range anywhere from around 122 for some electric cars, at least 300 plus miles. The current sort of average range of new electric cars is around 200 miles. We've got some examples of the developing van and heavier goods vehicle fleets on the screen there. All electric vehicles at the moment are eligible for a plug-in grant of some sort. So electric cars, provided they have a registered retail price of £32,000 or less, have a grant of £1,500. That's put on or taken off, at the point of sale. So new purchasers don't have to worry about that. So the sticker price that you will see in dealers or online sales sites will include the plugged-in car grant. There are rather more generous grants available for plug-in vans. So a small van such as the Nissan ENV 200, which has that has a maximum gross vehicle weight of less than 2.5 tons is £2,500. So sorry, listen to is £2,500. Sorry, and that's you can purchase a maximum of 1,000 vehicles. So for significant fleet size, you can purchase a maximum of 1,000 vehicles per financial year with that grant in place. Larger vans, 2.5 to 4.25 tons gross vehicle weight, have a grant of £5,000 based on them. Same terms in terms of vehicle fleet size that you can purchase in the financial year. Both those vehicle types have to have a range, zero emission range of 60 miles or less. So you can purchase a plug-in hybrid van as well and benefit from a grant provided that they have that range of 60 miles. When we're talking about plug-in hybrids, so they combine a combustion engine, internal combustion engine plus a mains rechargeable battery. Generally have much lower range, particularly in cars around 20 to 50 miles. I think the Ford Transit PHEV is slightly higher. Not sure if it's quite at that 60 mile zero emission range. Apart from, so cars are not eligible for the plug-in car grant. Some vans may be, but the sales of these vehicles will be banned from 2035. But that's just a quick overview. The plug-in hybrids will combine a petrol, usually a petrol, sometimes a diesel engine with the battery electric motor. Okay, we'll move on then. So what is the impact then of some of the legislation? So I mentioned already clean air zones, London's ultra low emission zone, Oxford have a zero emission zone. How is that going to impact users? Well, there's a definition of an ultra low emission vehicle. So, and that is a vehicle that emits less than 75 grams per kilometre of CO2 at the tailpipe. And often that is the target that we're looking for in terms of what's going to enable a vehicle to enter a clean air zone or an ultra low emission zone. Obviously, a zero emission zone will be completely emission free. It's important to note that that terminology, the ULEV terminology, is technology neutral, so it wouldn't necessarily need to be a plug-in hybrid. It could be a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle as well. So they don't need to be fully electric. However, for most grants for small to large vehicles, we're beginning to see a move to the to this sort of ULEV definition of emitting less than 50 grams per kilometre of CO2 at the tailpipe with a minimal travel distance with no emissions at all. So some form of electric propulsion needs to be in place. So now I'm just going to move on to some of the different sort of vehicle types that you might see, that you might consider as a business that's looking to move goods or move people around. Got a few examples here from the very small to the very large. All of them have one thing in common, that is they're all have electric propulsion of some sort. So we see we've included e-cargo bikes here because they are a real solution, particularly in more urban built-up areas, to perhaps deal with that last mile delivery. We see a lot of couriers, and we also see Sainsbury's and other supermarkets are available, of course, using e-cargo bikes, certainly trialling e-cargo bikes as part of their delivery fleet in some of the more built-up areas, particularly in and around London and the other bigger cities. But you can also see on here examples of differing sizes of freight vehicles with electric motors of some sorts. We've got a refrigerated van here that's used to deliver food. We've got a larger lorry that's also used to deliver heavy vehicles, but we're seeing increasingly electrified refuse collection vehicles, which work really well, obviously in a much more urban environment, to minimise noise, minimise pollution. And there's lots of studies being done, and actually lots of really positive reports from crews using them that they actually work really well, and it's a really positive solution and a really positive alternative to some of the larger, heavier, smellier, older vehicles that they might have been using in the past. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour around vehicles and policy context. Just going to talk now a little bit about EV charging. So going to start with a bit of scene setting and jargon busting. So two things we're going to talk about a lot during the course of this presentation and in any conversation around electric vehicles is kilowatt hours and kilowatts. So kilowatt hour is a measure of energy, and that is what we use when we're quoting the size of batteries. And I'm going to talk about those, some different battery sizes further down the line. And really, it is the amount of energy that the battery can store. So comparable really to the size of a fuel tank a petrol or diesel car. Obviously, the bigger the kilowatt hours, the longer the car's range. Other factors. There are other factors involved in understanding sort of range of a vehicle, but certainly bigger battery, longer range. But typically, a vehicle will do around 3 to 4 miles per kilowatt hour. If that's talking about cars, probably slightly less for a heavy vehicle such as a van. We're talking about kilowatt. That's a measure of power. So the electric motors are rated in kilowatts in terms of power they produce, but also when we talk about charging points, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, we rate them in terms of their kilowatt, their measure of power. And that's just this graphic here just sort of gives you an indication of how a kilowatt fills up the battery in a kilowatt hour in terms of kilowatt hours. So a little bit more around some of the considerations for charging. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So just a few other points about charging. So the higher the kilowatt rating of a charge point, the quicker the charge. So we will sometimes talk about 7 kilowatts charge point, but we may also talk about 150 or even 350 kilowatt charge point, and they will obviously put in a lot more power a lot more quickly. The charge time depends very much on the distance driven, not necessarily on battery time. But also it's very important to note that the vehicle itself will confirm the rate of charge that will take into its battery. So you can plug in a lower powered vehicle, a vehicle that charges at a lower rate, into a higher powered charge point, and you won't damage the battery in the vehicle. What we're seeing is that most people will slow charge most of the time. That's in part due to the people that are early adopters of these vehicles that generally have either an opportunity to charge at home, either on their driveway using a dedicated charge point or a 3-pin plug, or they're able to make use of up until relatively recently, perhaps less well used public charging network. One last little bit about some of the jargon that we talk about. If you can move on to the next slide, please, before we go into the different charge point types. So just a couple of things to consider. We won't talk about this one too much, but we do talk about AC and DC charging. So alternating current is the power supply we receive from UK households, is what will go into most electric vehicles if we're talking about either charging at home or charging on a standard sort of 7 kilowatt charge point that we either have installed at our home, or the kind of charge points that we see what's called a fast charge point installed in a public setting. And the vehicle itself will then convert alternating current into DC to top up the battery. So there is a limit to the amount of kilowatts that can go in that route. Direct current is the type of current that's required for charging batteries. So for higher powered charge points, we convert AC at the charge point into higher rated, so 50 kilowatts or more of DC that can then go straight into the battery, and that can then charge the battery at a much higher rate. So hopefully we haven't bamboozled you with too many different terms and things like that, but this is just a little bit of information about different charge points. Not going to go through it in too much detail, but you can see along here for the type of charging, the speed of charging as well. So when we talk about home charging, you can charge at home with a standard 3-pin plug. Most electric vehicles will come with a 3-pin plug as standard as part of the package. It is a very slow rate of charge, particularly if you've got a vehicle with a larger battery, and there are fewer safety function built into the charge points, built into plugging a vehicle into a 3-pin plug. So it's perhaps one to be considered either in emergency if you're traveling further afield and you don't have direct access to a charge point. Most people can and are able to install up to 7 kilowatt charge point at home, and you will get a full charge for an average 60 kilowatt hour battery in around 10 hours. Increasingly, we're seeing public charge points installed. There's a couple of examples here in the bottom. So on-street residential, for which there is funding, which we can perhaps talk about further down the line. But they're rated between 7 and 22 kilowatts, and you'll get a full charge in between 4 and 6 hours. But increasingly, we're also seeing in more built-up locations, particularly in central London, but in other larger cities as well, lamp columns being utilised because they're a relatively low cost, easy way to put in a larger number of chargers in a single location to maximise the benefit for members of the public. Then we can also talk about destination chargers, and there are perhaps 2 different options there. So if you go to most supermarkets, you will now see some form of charging partnership in place, whereby the supermarket provides a charge point in partnership with a charge point operator, and they're usually free to use, with the idea being that shoppers can top up their vehicle whilst they're shopping. Increasingly, we're seeing higher powered charge points at destinations, for example, at McDonald's, restaurants, fast food outlets, and things like Starbucks, so you can top up your vehicle as you top up yourself. But generally, you will also see rapid charging units installed en route in locations, for example, at motorway services, to allow us to sort of stop and do a quick top up en route. And if you need a full charge, so up to about 80% battery, you can generally do that in less than an hour. So the next step in terms of future proofing is ultra rapid charging. We're beginning to see higher powered charge points, charging hubs pop up. So this is a BP charging forecourt in South London with a series of 150 kilowatt chargers. And this here is, you may have heard of it, is GridServe's electric forecourt. It's first of its type. That's in Braintree in Essex, but they've got plans for a number of other chargers, a number of other similar electric forecourts, and they've got everything from 7 kilowatts chargers all the way up to 50 kilowatt, and these ultra rapid 350 kilowatt chargers. Important to note that at this stage there are very few vehicles that can charge at even 150 kilowatts and 350 kilowatts. So this is very much future proofing and planning for the future when more and more vehicles can charge at these higher rates. As I said before, there's nothing stopping you plugging your vehicle into a higher powered charge point. It will just only charge at the maximum rate it can charge at. Just a little bit around some of the costs of charging. So if you're charging at home, you're looking at perhaps around 17 pence per kilowatt hour, so around about £9 to fully charge. Obviously, that is based on some average figures from earlier in the year. So things will have changed somewhat. So £9 to fully charge a 7 kilowatt battery and do around 200 miles. You could be looking at anywhere between 20 and 30 pence per kilowatt hour for some of these public networks, and anywhere between 35 and 65 pence per kilowatt hour for the higher power charge points. So yes, hopefully that's useful to you. If we can move on, so just one more slide to talk about in this section before we talk a bit about some of the myths around EV charging. Just want to sort of make it clear that what we're not saying here is that we should all replace all of our electric vehicles, all of our petrol and diesel vehicles with an electric vehicle and not do anything else around considering alternative modes. It's very much, we suggest looking at your travel requirements or your communication requirements in a sort of a hierarchical, looking at this kind of hierarchical route. So we're all used to communicating in this format now, talking online, going to webinars, and that clearly is the way certainly to reduce our carbon emissions in terms of transport emissions. And it's something we should look to as much as possible. We're all used to doing sort of blended working and considering whether we need to make that trip to the office, and perhaps that's something we need to continue doing as we come further out of the pandemic. You will see though that even before electric vehicles, we highlight that perhaps you should consider active travel, whether that's walking or cycling. And when we feel it's much safer to do so, looking at making use of public transport for those longer journeys, with electric vehicles and car sharing sort of further down the line above internal combustion engine vehicles. And obviously at the bottom of the pile there is air travel, which more and more of us are looking at alternatives to these longer journeys or doing short trips by air. Okay, so I'm going to go on to answer a few of the key myths before I hand back to Heather in a moment. So the first one I'm going to talk about is around EV range, which I think is probably one of the bigger concerns that most people have. We can move on to the next slide, please, Heather. So this slide is very much focused on EV range for cars, but it's very much, it applies equally to larger vehicles as well. And is range an issue? So we used to talk very much about range anxiety, particularly for cars. Perhaps that's less of a concern. What may be more of a question for many people is actually charge point anxiety. Is the charge point going to be available or working when I get there when I really need it? But in terms of range, as I said before, most new EVs on the market typically have a range of around 200 miles, some significantly more than that. Battery performance, it's true, can be impacted by a number of factors, much in the same way as fuel consumption on a petrol or diesel vehicle can. So a large part of that is around driving style. So if you've got a very heavy right foot, if you do a lot of high-speed motorway miles, then yes, you will reduce the range of the battery. So it's all about considering your driving style and really considering how and where you're using your electric vehicle. Significant extremes of temperature will impact the range of the vehicle, particularly very, very cold weather. But it was interesting to know that when an electric vehicle is plugged in, you can usually control heating from an app, so it allows you to either pre-warm or pre-cool EV, so you don't have to rely on using the heating or the air conditioning, which can also impact on range. So that's really useful to know. Although I did mention Chargepoint anxiety, it's good to know that there are just over 33,000 public charge points. If I'd have looked at this slide perhaps a week ago, we update this on a regular basis using stats from ZapMap, which is a really useful resource for electric vehicle users or anybody interested in looking at charge point availability across the UK. It would have been more closer to 30,000. So the number of charge points is growing almost on a daily basis. In all the latest announcements, the recent announcements from the government around their electric vehicle strategy and the recent funding they've announced, there's talk of a need for up to between 300,000 and 700,000 charge points by 2030. So yes, 33,000 is a good number. There is still a lot of work to be done. In the government's strategy, they have again highlighted this need to ensure that there are at least 6 high-powered charge points at all motorway service areas in England. They're working very, very hard to get that in place. So that's the first part of their aim to sort of develop the network across a high-powered network across the strategic motorway route and A roads as well. Just so you can have a look at this graph on the right, just gives you an idea of average range of EVs on the market since 2015. So we can see it's a significantly and rapid increase in terms of the average range, and we'll see that growing further down the line if we could, if we had a sort of 2022 onwards version of this graph. Okay, you might be interested as SMEs, interested to know a little bit more about LGVs and vans. So if we can move on to the next slide, we've got a little bit of information about the impact on vans. So it's fair to say that the van market is perhaps slightly less advanced than EVs, EV cars. We've got some examples here, and you'll see that in terms of range, certainly there are none here that can do more than 140 miles. Done a little bit of research, and there are 1 or 2 going forward. But you can see, so the Nissan ENV200 has been on the market for a while. It uses essentially the same technology as a Nissan Leaf, obviously slightly bigger and slightly heavier, so there is an impact on range. It currently has a 40 kilowatt hour battery, so the Nissan do quote that in a city cycle it will do up to 187 miles, so you know, very useful for shorter journeys. Some of the BD Auto, Decarbonising Citroën, Relay, and Vauxhall Movano, larger vans, actually the Citroën and the Vauxhall are essentially the same vehicle with a different badge on. These 2 vehicles, the Citroën and the Vauxhall, do have versions with different battery sizes, a 37 kilowatt hour, which has a very low range, and a 70 kilowatt hour battery. But what's not on here, we've seen recently launched slightly smaller vans from Vauxhall. So Vauxhall's Vara E has a 75 kilowatt hour battery and will have has a range of around 205 miles, and has quite a decent towing capacity as well. SAIC, which is Chinese manufacturers, recently launched their e-Deliver, which has battery sizes from 51.5 kilowatt hours up to 88 kilowatt hours, and that will the larger battery vehicle will do up to 219 miles. You'll see as the battery size gets larger on a van, payload will reduce. That's because you've got to, you know, obviously larger batteries weigh more, and that has to be considered in terms of its gross vehicle weight. So you do get a slight, slight reduction in its carrying capacity with a larger battery. It's fair to say there's lots more work to be done for van technology to catch up, but we're seeing all of the major manufacturers now really heavily exploring electrifying their fleet vehicles, and we will see this develop more and more as we get closer and closer to that 2030 and 2035 petrol and diesel ban on sales. That said, most of the sorts of work that's particularly sort of delivery work and local delivery work can be easily dealt with and covered by these admittedly relatively low range vans at the moment. So one of the other, next slide please, one of the other I suppose big questions that we get asked quite often is around the batteries themselves for electric vehicles and their reliability. There are, certainly in the early days, there were concerns as to whether the batteries would last for the life cycle of vehicles. I would say much like have the sort of reliability of a petrol or diesel vehicle over a 10 or 12 year life cycle. The older the vehicle gets, the batteries do slightly reduce in terms of their capacity, but we've certainly seen very few reports of batteries failing completely. In fact, EV manufacturers are so confident of the technology that they're providing now, is that they will pretty much all of them now have a warranty, provide an 8-year or 100,000 mile warranty on the batteries, sometimes slightly longer, which is over and above the standard manufacturer's warranty we're seeing on most vehicles. So that obviously shows they're confident in the performance of these batteries over a longer period of time. What we see here is a battery pack from a Nissan Leaf, and you can see rather than one individual unit, they're made up of a series of individual cells. So in the rare occasion when there are issues with the battery pack, it's generally an individual cell, and they can be removed and easily replaced, much in the same way as we remove parts from a standard internal combustion engine vehicle. And what we haven't touched on quite so much here, perhaps we'll get to in a moment, is the savings that can be made in terms of running costs. And there are significantly fewer, because there are significantly fewer moving parts in an electric vehicle, servicing and ongoing running costs are significantly lower when we look at running electric vehicles compared to internal combustion engine vehicle. Electric vehicle batteries do have a finite life cycle in terms of their use to power a vehicle. There's lots of scope there for using end-of-life batteries for energy storage, and we're seeing lots of applications for that. One of the big football stadiums in the Netherlands is powered by a bank of batteries from Nissan Leafs, and it helps to power all the electrical infrastructure at the Ajax Stadium in the Netherlands. There's also lots of work around providing battery storage to do easy pop-up charging for electric vehicles, and also to store power generated by renewable sources as well. Also, there's a significant industry developing to enable us to repurpose and recycle. There's obviously significant materials in terms of lithium, cobalt, and things like that in batteries, which can be readily reused, provided we can extract them from the batteries that they're in. So there's lots of, particularly in Germany, but it's beginning to develop here as well, here in the UK as well, to enable us to pull apart end-of-life batteries and reuse them, and that will be a big part of sort of developing the battery manufacturing capabilities in the UK going forward. There are concerns, just a couple more things. There are a few concerns in terms of supply chain and some of the materials within the battery. So manufacturers are doing lots of work around trying to minimize the use of things like cobalt and lithium, and ensuring that it's clear where the batteries are coming from, but also doing lots of work to sort of reduce the emissions relating to that, which we're going to touch on in a moment, by sort of streamlining processes, developing battery manufacturing in the country of origin, rather than having to transport batteries from manufacturing to be installed in vehicles. So there's lots of work being done around the resource and the manufacturing of the batteries as well. And that brings us on to the next slide. Sorry, Heather, around one of the big questions, which is carbon emissions from electric vehicles. There's a lot of information on this slide, so I won't go into it in too much detail. But if you do want to have a good look, Carbon Brief have produced this report that essentially identifies that looks at compares electric vehicle emissions, CO2 emissions over its full life cycle from manufacturing to end of life, with conventional vehicles and a sort of equivalent popular hybrid type vehicle. And it's highlighted that certainly in 2019, so things have probably changed somewhat since then, that emissions per kilometre of an Nissan Leaf electric vehicle were 3 times lower than an average conventional car. And we'll probably see that amount, that number increase further as we focus more on using renewable source of electricity. We do see many Chargepoint networks using renewable energy tariffs as well, although it is fair to say that battery emissions can vary somewhat depending on the I guess the energy production network in different countries. Just a few little points about the graphs themselves. So what we're seeing there is an estimate of the life cycle emissions, and the different colours are perhaps quite key, probably really useful to know. So in grey on the graphs on the left hand side, that shows tailpipe emissions. Obviously we don't see any of those for electric vehicles, so that's a big difference. So orange shows the fuel cycle, and that's oil production, transport, refining, and electricity generation relating to anything to do with manufacturing and transport. So that could be transporting goods for the manufacturing process, and obviously transporting vehicles when they're manufactured to point of sale. It's basically emissions from the non-battery components of the vehicle are in dark blue, and then the light blue is a sort of a conservative estimate of emissions from manufacturing the battery. So you can see there's, the biggest portion of any, particularly for early days of electric vehicle manufacture, was the fuel cycle. That's when most batteries are manufactured in single locations, generally China, and they're being transported to various different factories to be installed in electric vehicles. So there's been a big change over the last 10 years or so, and that's only going to increase as we get closer to 2030. The last slide from me is just to highlight that fact. It's sort of a third of the battery electric cars have a third of the life cycle of emissions of an equivalent petrol car. So we get battery is 97 grams per 97. The battery is the very lowest number there, and then we go all the way up to petrol 275. Hydrogen fuel cell. If you've got any questions about hydrogen fuel cell, please direct them at Heather, because she is our resident expert in this area. I've rambled on for long enough. I will stop talking now and hand back to Heather to do the last few sections of this presentation.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Richard. And I appreciate everybody that's put comments into the comments box as well. So just to confirm, we will be recording this and it will be available. I know that Sandwell Council are looking at issuing that on the website so other people can see it. And also Zapmat will provide a link in the comment for you as well. So what I'm going to go through for the next kind of 10 minutes is around the business case. So there's a lot of questions around this. What's the difference between the cost comparison of car, a van, etc. And we'll go through kind of those steps and what it can provide you. As Richard has mentioned, there's a lot of legislation changing, with new sale of cars being banned from 2030 for petrol and diesel, and hybrids from 2035. And that is, of course, work on how we deal with the second-hand market as well. So in terms of the business case for electrification, of course, it brings an instant carbon reduction to your business, almost 70% as well for what you're doing. And some of them can almost claim up to about 80 to 90. So it's a great way of looking at how you can reduce your carbon emissions as part of your business aims. So, of course, as Richard mentioned, with removing yourself from an internal combustion engine, you are removing the tailpipe emissions from your vehicle. So it helps with the local area. And, of course, where those energy is made, so whether that's being from renewables or solar or a power station, and that is managed at that end. And of course, there is a decarbonisation aim for the UK government to look at removing to zero carbon by 2050. So it enables that to be kind of taken by central government. Of course, there's a big part on it. It's a lot quieter, a lot smoother. I know that me and Richard are EV drivers, and I have to admit, I don't think we'd go back. So, you know, and it is a very different experience. And of course, there is a higher purchase cost, but a lower running cost. And that's because there's less parts. So you are looking at a lot more, cost back is a lot quicker. Of course, when you are looking at those ultra low emission zones or zero emission zones that Richard was on about, it does allow you a penalty-free access to congestion zones. Of course, if you've got a hybrid, it's slightly different sometimes because it just depends on your tailpipe emissions, but it does mean that you can go into areas of Birmingham, for example, or Manchester, things like that, and it allows you to kind of have that access where it might be quite costly otherwise. And of course, your maintenance and costs as well. As I've kind of mentioned, with the lower running costs of your vehicle, and of course zero road tax and a reduced benefit in kind. Of course, there will be questions. I'm sure you're asking me of where are we going to fill the tax in? You know, how's that going to be working? You know, work out as we go through electrification, and that is something that's being discussed at a government level and will be issued out once there is a way forward on that. But there's definitely consultations on that at the moment. But for now, it is zero road tax. And then, of course, there is an increasing choice of models of vehicles out there, as Richard mentioned. For the cars, it's roughly about 75 models at the moment. It's going up to about 176 models by 2025. But with the vans, that is an ever-growing market, as it was mentioned, that there's a lot more coming out with Vauxhall. And we gave you a flavour of a couple of vans, but it just gives you an idea that there is a lot more coming out in the market as the industry is looking at how they can diversify from the internal combustion engine. So just to kind of give you an idea of costs. So we have based this on a Peugeot. So hopefully if you've got company cars out there or you drive a car yourself, it gives you a bit of comparison, of course, that the bigger the vehicle, so bigger the van, the cost on that. But just to give you an idea, so we've kind of put three scenarios together. So if you are charging from home, so the average cost is on average 19p, but of course that is going up. So from the 1st of April to 21p, but of course some people are still on fixed rate tariffs. So just to kind of give you an idea, at the moment, if you were to charge up a 50 kilowatts battery, that would cost you about £9.45. I think with the new rates now, it would be about £10 to £11, but it works out at 45p per mile. So you're looking about 5 to 6p per mile with the new off-gem cap. And you compare that against kind of a petrol or diesel, which is normally about 10 to 16p for a diesel, 12p to 22p for a petrol. Of course, you've got the public network, that is around about 38p per kilowatt hour. So you are looking at, it is a little bit more pricey than what you would do if you're charging from home. But if you're looking at a 50 kilowatt battery, that'd be £19. Of course, with the increase, it'd be about 21. So it's about 8 to 10p per mile. So you're still looking at a saving or a cost comparison for using the network. And then, of course, at work, if you were allowing your teams or you were allowing your staff to charge at work, the average at the moment is about 14p per kilowatt hour. And we're working that would be about £7 to charge. So you are looking at, what are the comparisons? It is still a lower running cost. And as we know, with the oil prices at the moment, there is a 5p discount, but as that's going to increase, at the moment it's looking at between anywhere to about a £2 to £2.50 is the forecast for coming up to October. Even with the energy off-gem cap, it is significantly lower running costs. And we've put a bit more down here around what are the differences between using electricity to petrol to diesel to hydrogen. And normally what we like to kind of just put an idea on it is the energy efficiency. So what are you actually getting out of the type of fuel that you're using to run that vehicle, to understand the cost. So of course, electricity, when you are putting electricity into the vehicle, you are getting quite a lot of output. It's normally about 90% of the energy you put in will go straight to your wheels, in comparison to a petrol and diesel, which is around about 30 to 40% of the energy that you actually make in the combustion engine actually runs your car. So you can see from the efficiencies, you do get a lot more cost per kilowatts for each kilogram or litre of fuel. So as you can see, for the electricity, you get about 90 pence per kilowatt. For a litre of petrol and a diesel, it's 1.6 to 1.7. But for hydrogen, it's about 12 kilograms. So it's quite expensive hydrogen. And there's a lot of elements going on around about what type of energy we use with hydrogen to power that. Is it green? And there's a whole spectrum of different, whether it's from renewables or whether it's actually from different manufacturing processes, of how actually carbon friendly that is, or carbon neutral, and actually making sure that you do use that correctly. Because with green hydrogen, for example, which is renewable hydrogen, it would actually need 3 times more energy to run the same as just getting the electricity from the grid. So it's actually using it in the right way as well. So that's why we talk about electricity, because it is the most efficient way of charging and using that car, because you get a lot more energy efficiency out of it and for the costs that you do provide. So I've just put on a little bit of a vehicle running cost comparison. So we've taken the UK's most popular car, a Vauxhall Corsa, and put the Vauxhall e-Corsa in, just to give you an idea of costs. So as you can see, the first yearly cost is about £980 that you'll get in terms of, so this is on the off-gem cap, this is the 21p that's in place, and the annual kind of the 6 yearly cost, so you'd get £5,800 back, and I've got a second-hand car and my payback is 4.5 years. So yeah, there's a lot around running costs that you can do as well, and the slides will be available for you afterwards if you want to have a bit of a look, because I know we're going through this. So if you're looking at buying a new electric vehicle, we always advise you to go towards companies that can provide you a bit more information, and there is actually an electrical vehicle approved kind of certificate that retailers and basically dealerships can apply to, and that helps you know that you've got a properly trained sales and aftercare sales staff that can provide you information on all your business needs. They will normally bend over backwards, and they're really helpful to provide you quite accurate information on warranties. As Richard said, some do 8 years, some do more, some do it based on mileage. And they can kind of provide you the information on what kind of equipment and services you'd need for the electric vehicles, where to charge them, and on-site charging provisions, so charge points, what you might need to meet your needs as a business. And you get the opportunity to do test drives as well, which is really, we would definitely recommend, because it's actually quite useful if you've got kind of like a weekend trial or in a day, just to give you an idea of what that range means and the anxiety as well. And they can give you a lot more on those plug-in grants. So we'll put a link into the EVA website, so you can find out who your local dealership is that actually has that offering for you. And similarly, it's not always new EVs to go for. There's a second-hand market. As I mentioned, I'm a second-hand market buyer. But there's also different ways, leasing them, subscription services. So there's a lot of finance offerings that there are. And of course, there's a lot in there around looking at how you potentially buy a second-hand. There's around about 500,000 vehicles on the road already plug-in, and around about 100,000 EVs are going onto the market every from last year. And I think in March, I think the amount of electric vehicles that were bought just in March outraged 2019's whole year of electric vehicle sales. So there will be a second-hand market, and there's looking to be a price parity even with the vans by 2026. So and that's very much what the government's aim is that whilst there might be higher upfront costs, that over time there will be a price parity with a normal vehicle. And of course, you always have to make sure that you're aware of the different charges for the car. For the second hand, some of them, Nissan Leaf, for example, they do have a different charging cable than a lot of the newer ones. If you want to know a little bit more information, we could put a link on our website that explains all the different charge cables. There's only two, type 1, type 2, and CHAdeMO and a CCS cable, just to give you a couple of acronyms. But we can provide all that information, but most of the newer cars will come with those charging cables. But with secondhand, just double check that your car does come with those cables. Some of the older batteries used to come with a lease because of the warranty worry. Normally the Renault Zoe, not a lot of the newer ones, but just double check that when you are looking at a secondhand. And of course, there's second-hand dealers that are part of the EVA scheme, which I know Richard just put a comment into the comments box on. And you might even find that for your business, maybe you do a car club, get a couple of EV cars for your staff to trial out, or you have a car club in your area that your staff could use, maybe that is available. So Enterprise, there's quite a few, and a few others that are kind of co-wheels, etc. you can look at, and they give you an opportunity to try before you buy. So there is a lot on there as well. So just to kind of give you an idea of some of the challenges around BEV, as I say, we've mentioned around the high capital cost, but the price parity that's coming in 2026. So maybe it's thinking about what will be your next vehicle, when's the best time, when is your vehicles due up to be changed, and also the infrastructure costs. But it also is actually, if the infrastructure is getting better on the public network, can you link in with that? We've got 33,000 at the moment, but the aim is to get 300,000 by the end of 2030. And there's a lot of grant funding coming out for that with local authorities and Chargepoint network operators. But looking at the mileage as well. So if you have quite a high daily mileage, there is actually a range feasibility. The more mileage you do in that electric car, the more it will provide you the benefits of the cost analysis as well. So, and of course, if it's lower mileage, then that might be where you need to have a look at, well, where are you going into? Are you going to Birmingham in the zones and the costs? But also looking at, how that can help you with the long-term aims to maybe change the way that you use that vehicle. So maybe it's getting deliveries every Monday, every Wednesday, and every Friday instead of every day. So you can use that vehicle for longer one day than another day. So you can get that out there as well. And I know that there are quite a few schemes that are actually van drivers using it from 9 till 5, and then they actually offer out their van from 5 p.m. onwards for other hauliers to use, or other people to use that vehicle to go to IKEA and pick stuff up. So there's actually a lot around commercialisation that you can use when your car is not in use. or at night you can use a vehicle to grid. So you charge it at a depot, and then that electricity that you've got goes back into the grid and sold, and then at night you can then take from the grid when it's less in demand. So there's a lot around what you can do. Of course, payloads, as Richard mentioned, that's always a key one. They might be slightly smaller, but just double check that when you are looking at your vehicle. And looking at the recharging limitations, so making sure that you're not doing too much time to charge. So do you need to have one that can take a faster charger, or can you actually slow charge overnight? And if there's no opportunity to charge at home, how that's going to work with the public network. So of course, that's kind of your vehicle, your fleet, but we also want you to consider what to do for your staff when they're commuting to work. So have you looked at, potentially car sharing, getting pool cars, electric vehicle pool cars, so they can travel in via public transport and pick up a car for work, and just making sure that there is a lot of options. There's even electric vehicle salary sacrifice schemes for a lot of businesses to support the moving away from internal combustion engines, and that's what workplaces can offer. I say I've just pulled out some of the devices that are in your area. So this is a Zap map. So I know that somebody asked me about Zap map, but this shows you one of the maps. So anything in pink is a rapid charger. Anything that's in blue is kind of a fast charger, so between 7 and 22 kilowatts. And that gives you an idea of where they are located. So have a look at Zap map. Also, there is options for, how do I access them? There's so many different Chargepoint network operators. There's Shell, there's BP, there's different types of Chargepoint providers. All-Star and Octopus Energy, as well as ZapMap, have created kind of like a one payment system that you can use. So All-Star have it, similarly as Zap Pay now as well. So you can actually make it so it's not that you have to have 15 different apps on your phone. And this is something that the government are looking at as well, as we understand that there are different access elements, but that is something businesses can do as well. And what we would always say is that if you are looking at your fleet, to look at doing a fleet review. So understanding what vehicles you have, what the costs are, what your operational considerations, to understand what are your next steps to go towards electric vehicles. And it might be actually this session, it's recorded, sharing that with your staff to give them information and insight of what they can do as well. So just some support that you can offer. So there is the workplace charging grant scheme. So this is available to all businesses, charities, and local authorities. At the moment is for spots on your actual car park that's used for staff, so they can charge during the day. And you get 75% of capital costs towards the installation of a charge point up to £350 per socket. You get a maximum of 40 sockets across each site. And when they do say if it is your business and you've got 40 different locations, it's still 40, or a point in each one would then go up to 40 sockets. It can, if you require any plugins that you don't need to require any ultra low emission vehicles or EVs for that, but it's just to be able to provide the infrastructure that is needed for staff. And Richard did mention there's an on-street charging grant scheme as well, the local authorities, but that is more for the on-street solution for either off-street parking or lamp columns, but that's something that would be talked through with your council as well. That's on until the end of this year, so that would be March 2023, and then it's reviewed every year to whether that grant continues. There are further resources. We do have at the Energy Savings Trust a free guide on a step-by-step guide for electric vehicles and fleet. There's also a fleet health check, so you can kind of look at a toolkit to help you look for what would be the impacts of changing your vehicle. And we do have some templates around fleet vehicle policy to move you towards electric vehicles as well. And there's a lot to support you with different parts. So if you have a look at the Energy Savings Trust Fleet Services website, and there can be a lot more around on that. So I'll probably link on to Sandwell, but I know we've got a question that's come in, but what we'll do is we'll let Gareth and Oliver just talk around what Sandwell are doing, and we'll answer your questions afterwards.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather, and thanks, Richard, as well. I'm Gareth from Sandwell Council. and we just wanted to give you a little bit of background on the reason that we wanted to engage with you. So we looked at the climate change emergency as a council last year, and we've got a climate change strategy which went through last year in 2021, and we looked at how we as a borough were going to reduce some of the carbon and emissions that we have as a borough. So I understand about 35% of our pollution is caused by transport, about 30% by households, about 30% by businesses, and the rest is from the public estate, such as schools, hospitals, libraries, and other community buildings. So as a council, we're trying to look at a breakdown of where these challenges to climate change are coming from within the borough. And we've adopted a strategy, and we're starting to look at working with households, working with our transport agenda, working with businesses to try to reduce our carbon emissions and our impacts on the climate. So we also have an economic recovery plan, and climate change is one of our themes on our economic recovery. So if you wanted to speak to me or the climate change team regarding either the strategy or the economic recovery plan, well, you know, we definitely welcome that. Thank you for attending today. We don't mind. We're welcoming residents and businesses participating. We also want to have a green business network established in Sandwell, which is about peer-to-peer. We're going to talk about themes of sustainability. So they could be things like recycling, energy efficiency, heat pumps, electric fleet, as we've spoken about today, rainwater storage to flush toilets and things like that going forward. So this is a very practical group that we want to set up. We've got some excellent businesses in Sandwell already that already do recycling, that already have electric fleets, that are already doing all of this already. So it's about getting to know who in our area is already involved with this and learning from each other. And I'm sure there's other good ideas out there as well. So I'll pop an email address in the chat if anyone wants to get in touch with us, if that helps for anything. So thank you especially to Energy Saving Trust, to my colleague Oliver Ford, who works in the transport team, and to, of course, to Heather and Richard as well. So yeah, thanks very much.
No problem. Thank you very much, Gareth. I know that if there are any businesses here that do want to work with Sandwell Council for any maybe delivery of these kind of events or supporting that, please also get in touch with Sandwell Council. And this will be published hopefully on the website. Oliver and Gareth, do tell me wrong if I have got that wrong. So it means that any businesses can share that as well and provide a bit more information for your staff. So we know that it's close to 1 o'clock, so thank you guys for all your support and attending. I don't think we actually have got any questions. I think I misunderstood with some of the comments. So unless there is any questions, we will stop the webinar. But as has been sent through, is that you can email thinksandwell@sandwell.gov.uk for any questions, and we'll be most happy to help you. So, well, thank you all for coming. I say, as there are no questions, thank you so much and have a lovely afternoon.